Hello, fellow innovators. This is Patrick Emmons.
And this is Shelley Nelson.
Welcome to the Innovation and the Digital Enterprise Podcast, where we interview successful visionaries and leaders, giving you an insight into how they drive and support innovation within their organizations. Today, we're welcoming Dr. Mik Kersten to the show. Mik is the founder and CEO of Tasktop. Tasktop is an organization where he's created a model and tools for connecting the end-to-end software value stream. In 2018, Mik launched his book, Project to Product, introducing the flow framework with concepts to help drive software at the pace of organizations. I met Mik a couple years back at the DevOps Enterprise Summit. He had this presentation that I can tell you just knocked people on their butts. Really, it was like, in my opinion, it was the Rosetta Stone for software development of how do you communicate between business, development, and operations. And it really set the audience on fire. It was great presentation. I've gotten to know Mik over the past couple years. If you get a chance, he's got plenty of stuff on YouTube you should check out. But Mik, really excited to have you on the show today. I think what you and your team over at Tasktop are doing really hits it on the nail on the head of why we started the podcast. So it's really exciting to have you on here today.
Welcome to the show, Mik.
Oh, my pleasure. Great to be here. And thanks for that Rosetta Stone intro. That's quite something. So I'll try to have the answers live up to that.
Okay. So Mik, if you don't mind, can you please share with our listeners, for those who are not aware, what is Tasktop?
So Tasktop's a company I founded over a decade ago, right outside of my PhD thesis, where what I was doing for that thesis work is looking for sort of, the next 10x improvement in how software is built. And I was working on programming languages, and I realized that we were only seeing incremental improvements on that front. So I thought, okay, how can we really, at enterprise scale, because to me it was really large scale stuff that was much more interesting, how can we, what would it take, and this is the neat thing when you're doing research, what would it take to go 10x faster, to make software 10x better? And this kind of relates back to what Patrick just said, where I realized it was less around programming languages and the technology layers, which are really important. There's been a lot of progress on that front. But there was actually something more that I was finding as I was doing research and analyzing software value streams, so basically how software goes from ideas to running code, and realizing that there's something wrong with this communication, this collaboration, this flow and feedback of information, to go back to that Rosetta Stone point. And so I started doing research around these disconnects between software and the value stream. First, as research, then my PhD supervisor and I created Tasktop as a vehicle to really commercialize that research. And the really neat part of that was to learn more and more. So we've been able to gather companies' data, learn from them, have a lot of discussions with IT leaders on where the bottlenecks are in their value streams, what's really getting in the way of large transformations, and why is it so much harder to build software in a large enterprise than it is in a small startup or in a tech-native company. And really that's been Tasktop, is this journey of providing the tooling and infrastructure to measure, analyze, and then optimize value streams, and to really connect the people doing that work, and most recently, to make all of that work visible through these flow metrics that came out of the flow framework that I put into the Project to Product book. So that's Tasktop in a nutshell, and I'm just hoping that and thankfully I'm increasingly seeing that the work we're doing is helping us better understand what it takes to scale effective software delivery.
Yeah, one of the concepts that I really think that Tasktop, from my perspective, really solves is, there's so many buzzwords thrown around in improving software capability in organizations, right? Digital delivery of value to the customer is what you touch on in your book, and in everything around Tasktop, around the bottlenecks, the constraints, and how do we actually get the flow moving in the right direction. From your background, I know, having worked closely with folks over at BMW, one of the concepts I think is really interesting is how the value streams are really defined around the organization or the outcomes. Not so much, we focus on features, but we don't focus on our capability to provide features. If you could share some of the story around that, I think that'd be really great.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, since publishing Project to Product, I've found a consistent theme in terms of the problems that we see with large-scale software delivery versus let's say advanced manufacturing. And the interesting thing is when you look at mature production domains like manufacturing, there's a very clear sense of measuring the flow of value, right? And that's why I found that the car analogy is so useful to use, because everyone kind of gets it. When you see this, or imagine this car moving along the assembly line and getting more and more value as it's built up, and the organization wanting for that to happen with more quality, more quickly, and more reliably, it's a pretty clear metaphor. Yet, what I realized both in my research and then in all of our work with large enterprise organizations is that in software there is no consistent measure of value. So when we try to take those principles of doing a Gemba walk, right, going to where the work is done, where work happens, it's just fascinating that if we're only looking at the cost of work or problems with work, where are people getting stuck? Why do we need so many people on this particular project over here, and so on? We're not getting a picture of value. We're just getting a picture of costs and activities. So the mission for me, the big picture mission, was to help the industry define a consistent measure of value and of the flow of that value. So with the inspiration of manufacturing, where again that flow is very clear, to what we're doing with software, which is measuring the flow of value for intangible things. There's no car. We have no sense of whether the car got stuck or had a quality problem, had to be moved off the line into the rework area. None of that is as visible. Now, my experience as a developer was very different, because as a developer, writing code, it does not feel that intangible, right? It's not. There's definitely similarities for me to building Lego blocks, as I was just doing in the evening with my children, in terms of what writing code feels like, right? You're constructing things. You're constructing them with an editor, but you're actually constructing these things that feel like they have a reality to you, even though it's not a tangible reality. So it was a really interesting thing to me, is that as a developer, being part of the value stream, all of that work is visible. If your tests are passing, if you've deployed something or having trouble deploying it. And the problem becomes how can we make that visible to what a Gemba walk is supposed to be, which is to make it visible to executives. Because if executives have a very different picture of what code is, what good quality software is, what it takes to make software better, such as needing to invest in tech debt, needing to invest in improving your APIs and your automation and so on. If we don't have that same picture, if executives are just seeing the lens of cost and not seeing the things through the lens of what it takes to deliver value and to improve over time, then we're on completely different pages for the discussion. We don't have that Rosetta Stone. So my goal was really to say, okay, let's take that in terms of what we've learned as software developers, as SREs, as practitioners in software delivery. Let's take the things that we know represent value in software, and let's elevate them in a way that the executives, the business can understand. And let's make sure that's always oriented around the way customers pull value from the organization, not around activities such as spinning up and down projects and so on. So that was really the goal of the flow framework, is that software development is measurable, that it is, even though it's intangible, you can make it visible, and you can see how work flows, see how it gets stuck. And I've spent years and years creating visualizations around this. So let's create as simple a framework as possible to make executives part of that conversation, not feel like they have to go to every single hackathon to have any sense of what's going on, but then go back to their org charts to look at how they're going to slice that one person off every team to reduce costs, right? Like there's this massive mismatch between looking at an org chart and trying to understand the software organization and actually understanding how to deliver value within the software organizations. That's really the goal of the flow framework, is to bridge that gap.
Mik, speaking of measurement, we talked the other day about your teams and how they're being measured. How have they responded to that?
Yeah, so this is, I think, measurement is always an interesting thing, because as soon as you put in place a measurement in a business context, of course, everyone tries to manage to it, right? Think about the last time you had a weird MBO set or anything of that sort. And for me, Sam Guggenheimer, who's now one of the guru in our industry, now retired from Microsoft, he told me the story of bug math at Microsoft, where the leadership had put in place sort of the ideal bell curve of how many priority 1 versus priority 2 versus priority 3 defects there should be. So what happened next? And you have the ideal, with, you wouldn't have too many P1s, right? In the ideal scenario. So what happens next is very obvious, right? Is you just never create P1 defects unless, you look at, and everything becomes a P2 or lower, because this bug math, this thing was called bug math. This bug math is driving behavior, but it's driving behavior in a way that's masking valuable information because you actually want to know what your P1s are. So, Sam did get me thinking as he was reviewing early versions of the Flow framework of, making sure that two things. One is that the metrics are meaningful, not just to leadership. And actually in our product that implements the Flow framework, Tasktop Viz, is one of my favorite mottos now is visibility for leadership that's actionable for teams. Because if the visibility is not relevant to the teams, they're not going to spend their time making their work more visible. But if that visibility is actually showing where a team is blocked and waiting on a meeting that keeps getting rescheduled, or waiting for some environment that they were supposed to get 3 months ago or 3 weeks ago, once it's meaningful for them, well, you can actually get this flywheel of visibility and everyone being on the same page in terms of what it takes to deliver more software and to do it in a more fulfilling and joyful way. Because in the end, developers prefer writing cool software that gets released and used than doing menial tasks or waiting for input for yet another week from somebody. So to me, the key thing was, and I think this is where so many metrics and visibility initiatives have failed. One is not understanding how they'll get gamed, how the metrics will get gamed, and B, not making the metrics and measurements meaningful to the people doing the work. And so really my goal with the Flow framework was to avoid both those pitfalls. So the first pitfall is because the Flow framework is all around tracking these flow items, which the equivalent of cars moving down an assembly line, but with software, and their feature defects, risks, and debts. And so the key thing is the way that you game the Flow framework, so you make your flow velocity look better, or your flow time look better, is to break down your flow items into small chunks, so to make small batch sizes. And so as soon as that starts happening, you've already won, right? Because one of the big problems is that work is not broken into small enough chunks. And so you actually can't track where things are stuck, where things are waiting, where a developer, someone on the business side is frustrated, and so on. So I tried to build in that gaming to be actually a positive aspect of the Flow framework, not a negative one. Now, of course, if teams now break up and change to a single line of code into a user story, of course you'll end up with too many flow items showing. But they tend not to do that because it's a pain. You don't want to break down work too small. The problem is actually we tend not to break down big work like business epics small enough, or technical debt work where some piece of technical debt is now on its third release cycle, and no one really has a sense of how much effort's got into it, how much more needs to go into it, and so on. So the one thing was to make sure that the way to game this way of measuring was positive. And that's absolutely my experience from open source, where the way that we were working on when I was doing open source and taking a lot of community contributions, I did gamify it, right? We basically said, if you, I forget the exact numbers, but if you as an external person anywhere on the planet who are contributing to this open source project I was working on, the Mylan project, I think if you go over 24 features or defects done, you'll get commit rights. That's it. You've actually contributed that much flow to the project. You're getting commit, and your changes were accepted. Your pull requests were taken. You're getting commit rights. So it's a kind of a fun gamification. You're doing more. You're earning your rights and so on. And we would always publish scoreboards and so on. So when used in the right way, it actually works really well. When used in the wrong ways, it doesn't. But the whole point is to just incentivize those small batch sizes. And then the other thing is it's got to be meaningful for the teams. So, and the way that happens in the Flow framework is it almost immediately. Now, this is kind of much more obvious when you see a deployment of it, but almost immediately, whenever we've deployed the Flow framework to the customer, too much WIP, which was one of the flow metrics, so which work in progress, and it's called flow load in the Flow framework, is visible almost instantly. That too much work has been dumped onto the backlogs of the team or onto the release, and there's no way of finishing this work, and then more is taken on, and there are more discussions about what should get done and horse trading and so on, right? So almost immediately the teams see a benefit that making their work visible is going to help reduce their WIP so they can actually get more done, rather than talk about getting more done. And they can start finishing rather than and stop starting. So I think that's the key thing, is that the metrics need to create a virtuous cycle. Also to make the kinds of work that normally are not visible, such as investments in tech debt reduction, for teams to claim credit for those. So that's one of its main goals, is to make tech debt visible to the business side, because it's a critical. to invest in that, to take that down, to make investment into platform components. So the things that business products build on or business applications build on, to make that visible, make sure those products, those internal products and APIs and shared services and platforms, that they have their own backlogs, because those are key thing to invest and often gets key areas to invest and often gets ignored. So yeah, that's really been the approach in terms of avoiding those pitfalls that we see on metrics. So, and there's I guess there's one more that's interesting, which is I think no matter what, any kind of visibility systems can be used in the wrong ways, right? If they're it's got a low trust organization or something of that sort, and we know that more engaged employees produce better work, make happier customers, write better code, write more code, and so on. Which is why I actually made employee happiness one of the top, the metrics on the Flow framework. Is that if you're, and we've seen this, right? We've seen cases where internally at Tasktop, we're pushing so hard to a major launch event, puts a lot of pressure on the team, their happiness goes down, and that's visible in the metrics. And we know then, that the leaders of those teams need to do some extra work with the teams, need to give them some breathing room, or whatever the case may be. So just as a kind of not just as both a safety valve, because we are talking metrics here, I decided that measuring the happiness of teams and tracking it was absolutely key, again, to create this virtuous feedback loop.
It's great. The two parts that I took out of that is one, when you think about RPMs, right? Your machine is running so hot with the people. Obviously, you're going to blow a rod. Something's going to happen, right? The engine's going to seize. It can't go that fast. And being able to visibly demonstrate that to the decision makers, because I think we all see what happens in these death marches is a profound misunderstanding of the fractures that you're generating. That without an understanding of like why is that occurring, executives and leadership are like, well, people need to toughen up. And it's like that's not really what's going on. This isn't a shortness. This isn't a lack of integrity or internal fortitude. This is human capacity for I'm exhausted. This is too much. You've pushed this too far to a healthy state. So with that kind of mindset, is a challenge that you see from like an understanding of technical debt and the elastic capacity of human ability from a software development standpoint? Are those things that like tech native companies, software native companies really understand? And is that one of the critical things that as these organizations are shifting to becoming more of a software focused organization that they need to learn?
Yeah. So I think that you get the challenge, Patrick, right? Which is that, so you get that. You get the fact that someone's not going to do their best creative work after working all night. They're actually going to end up having 4 days of bad productivity. And then potentially, this gets exacerbated, leads to some toxicity and so on. So yes, I think what's happened is that digital native organizations, their leaders, their teams, they've evolved in such a way that these dynamics are just kind of innate, right? If you've got some kind of talent agency, you're going to realize that people are not going to do their best work, their best acting or singing after having done some kind of all-nighter performing as well, right? So you understand that as soon as you've got creative work in the picture, you need people to you need to understand and manage people's energy, and that's what I think great leaders of teams are able to do. The problem that I saw is that yes, in tech companies, it's all kind of obvious, right? And yes, some companies have better cultures, some companies have worse cultures, but because people have grown up in it and understand that software delivery is a creative discipline, they just kind of get it. And then, of course, what I was seeing is in large enterprise organizations who've not grown up with that, who've just had IT as this cost center, take a very different mentality, and the mentality is much more, if the engine can rev to 8,000 RPM, let's just keep it at 8,000 RPM. Now, if you don't have a way of seeing, because that's the problem, this is back to that Gemba thing, that has negative consequences, you're just going to keep it at 8,000 RPM, right? You're going to utilize your resources to their maximum effectiveness. The problem is that you've got the completely wrong model because you're pretending that these are robots or fungible resources building a bridge or something, not people doing highly complex and creative teamwork. So again, that was really the reason to do that, is to show. And here's one of the most stark ones and one of the fastest realizations our customers have had. And of course, great leaders happen to get this just the way you kind of get it. But the power of this is being able to demonstrate with data, is to show when we kept work in progress that high, we got half as much done in that 3-month cycle as when we reduced it and allowed people to actually manage, have a manageable workload, right? And I think the really neat thing of doing this with data, back to your point on the death marches, is sometimes death marches happen, right? And of course, it's more optimal over time to have 0 death marches. You'll actually get more done over time. We get that. But there might be some, company might be hanging on some replatforming, bringing something new to market, and so on. So there's this inherent external business pressure that's there. And I think actually exposing those dynamics, that if you push the teams that hard, now, of course, after that launch, and they're going to have to deal with defect after defect after defect because this thing is, has performance issues or whatever else is going on, you have a problem and you have to do something for those people. So I think the key thing is, and I actually remember this conversation with Troy McGinnis when we were analyzing some of the death marches that he'd been involved with at some of the organizations he worked with, right? He's worked with Tableau and Skype and so on. And it's, he gets it. Great engineers, leaders get it, get those dynamics of what will happen. And so my goal actually, this was a late night bar conversation I was having with Troy McGinnis. It was saying, okay, can we, Troy, here are the flow items. Is this enough of a tool for you to show? Because, you get it. You're a great engineering leader. Is this enough of a tool for you to show visually on a chart the effects of what will happen with a death march to people who've never run software teams? And, his answer was yes. And I was, okay, we're onto something here, right? Like, we're on to the fact that, people's happiness will go down. You need to deal with that. Their velocity will be lower. Defects will go higher. You won't have had any chance to deal with tech debt. Because again, it's not that people want lower productivity by keeping the RPMs at 8,000. It's just that they don't understand the trade-offs. And they don't understand the trade-offs because they've never seen the dynamics of software delivery firsthand. And that's really the goal. That's why I do really like your Rosetta Stone metaphor here, which is that it allows them to see and reason about those dynamics and actually then make that case with data as well, as we know is important when you're dealing with larger scales.
So, Mik, you talk about happiness and trust, and obviously I think we all know that's key to performance, but what would your recommendation be to these companies that are getting ready to establish these metrics? Do they need to start with employee engagement and see if the happiness and trust factor is there? Or do you feel like having these meaningful measurements end up creating more trust and happiness?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So my answer is actually no, you don't. I mean, I'd like it if organizations did, but you do not need to start with happiness. So the really interesting thing is the most effective thing I've seen is to just start with flow time. Because what happens is if you take a product value stream, which means you don't have just the agile team, you have several teams, you have people from the business, people from support, you've got everything needed to deliver on that part of your product portfolio. If you've got everyone focused on flow time, you've got everyone looking at the same scorecard. And you're no longer saying dev's too slow, or we're always waiting, requirements are always changing, or we never have our operational environments ready, and so on. You're actually objectively looking at where are our wait states. And just that act of, in a data-driven way, getting rid of finger pointing, whether it's within a team or across team or across silos, and saying, okay, this is what the data is showing us. This is where the wait states are. Let's begin. Let's learn. Let's see what happens if we remove that constraint, right? And we automate this part of the review process, or we staff up our UX team, or allocate more resources, or something of that sort. So I think there's just there's tremendous power in having everyone look at the same scorecard. No, like we were done with dev. It wasn't us. So that's extremely powerful. Now, of course, ideally, what you would do is have that connected up, and which is why we always recommend tracking your some kind of happiness or employee engagement score for every value stream, because you'd see that a reduction in flow time actually made people happier. It made their engagement go up. So they're getting, your time to market's improved, because that's what flow time measures, and people are happier. And then that's a really powerful story, right? And that's exactly what happens when you take the frustration out of people's days and unblock the things that they're waiting on. So yeah, ideally you'd always have happiness there as a guide to see that. But I think just the effect of having people looking at the same flow time scorecard, the same dashboard, in itself is powerful.
having had those conversations with clients, using some of the tools that Tasktop has out in the marketplace, just to talk about that flow time of like, what is it? And I think the unique perspective that Tasktop brings to the table is that you're looking at it from client identification, where, even to the product side, right? So integrating product into this conversation, it's not just an engineering question, it's not just an operations question, it's a product question, right? At what point in time do I identify and prioritize and we decide we're going to take action on this? And even before that, of like, when did it hit the backlog, and really start to analyze that, the lifetime of this work item, what you mentioned, whether it's a feature, a defect, technical debt, or some kind of risk. Not analyzing that component, I think, has created a lot of blind spots in a lot of organizations, that they're not really owning that. And it's the least structured component or discipline in that value stream, that in many cases, not always, obviously, but I think from a percentage wise, I think a lot of developers know how to do good software engineering. It's really the handoffs between product and development that seem to be the biggest place where things get dropped.
Yeah, exactly. It's so I think my experience is not yours, Patrick, and it is in those handoffs. It'll actually also be a common place we see it is in dependencies between different product value streams, when everything depends on one API, there's not enough resources on it, and so on. So it's in handoffs, and it's basically in dependencies, often where the wait states are. And if you take this data-driven approach, then this blameless approach, saying, okay, well, where do we need to invest next to improve the flow time? Like, where are things queuing up the most? Chances are everyone's very happy to actually put some attention there, right? It's not like you're too slow, and so on. So I think that blameless data-driven approach can really help. And, of course, what it tends to do as well is some key people realize that's been the problem all along, that they've got this long upstream wait on the business while they think they're getting things too slow. So I think the key thing there is to become more objective, more data driven, more blameless about it. You have to do that with the business as part of the value stream, right? If it's just IT doing it for itself, it's not enough, because too many of the wait states are external to the development teams. Again, be it on a different part of the business, different value stream, platform they're depending on, and so on. And then you go from there.
Well, and that's the blameless thing. I use the phrase debugging your software capability, right? Like, how do you debug it? Where do you find the bugs? Where do you find the issues? And to your point, like, and I like to see, you've mentioned a number of times when I've seen you give presentations, the criticality, like how important it is that organizations really do tear down that wall between businesses' understanding of how to build software and the decisions that they make and force upon engineering, because engineers are nice and they just won't fight a lot, right? And they'll be told, okay, you go do it, and then they do it, and they don't really surface the real issues very well. So from your standpoint, I know you've talked about this a lot, moving from Taylorism to these different types of modes of productivity, right? And looking at what the FANGs are doing, from your experience right now, like, is this like, if you're not doing this, it's really kind of a big challenge or threat to your organization's potential future?
Yeah, I mean, if you have any competitive dynamics in your market, or if any customer delivery pressure, doing it the old way is just not viable. It's even less viable in turbulent economic times, as we have right now, in times where more disruption will happen. So I think it's just the organizational commitment to get out of Taylor's mode is critical, to get out of that project and cost center mindset. It's been interesting, because I think a lot of organizations have that. Like, no one wants to be left behind, or their business to tank, or their costs to balloon with no value delivered, or no incremental new value delivered. So I think there is, most companies have that kind of commitment, and it's just, now it's a question of trying to get into action and how to take that first step. And Shelly, it's like you were asking, like, how, what do you start measuring? And so again, I think making sure that you get started somewhere and you prove out the benefits of this, because the really interesting thing is, when I've seen this implemented, there's quite a bit of low-hanging fruit. And there are quite a few people who already know where the low-hanging fruit is. And there are quite a few people who know that, we've been stuck on this monolith part of our architecture. That's what's slowing us down. They've been saying that for 2 years, but making the case with data to the business, to leadership, and actually getting another 20, 30 people on that capability, that's a wonderful thing, right? When that actually happens, and when you feel like you've been hitting your head against the wall, and all of a sudden you've made the case in the right way to see how this will make everything go faster. You've made it with data, and you've got that organizational investment and commitment. So I think now more than ever that needs to happen faster. The good thing is now more than ever, I think there's leadership wants to see it happen, because more and more business leaders realize that navigating this change requires more business agility than they've had in the past. And I think the good thing is there's a set of practices here and a discipline around value stream management that's exactly how you get that charts the path forward. And it is interesting because a lot of companies that they just the tech companies have this in place already in various names called various different kinds of approaches they've created themselves. But we're now at the point in time where I think it's pretty clear what elevating the things we've learned through Agile and DevOps are, and they are around these products and value streams and flow.
I guess last question. I know we're getting close on time here, but how do you think COVID has impacted some more regulated companies?
So I think that one of the hardest things, as a business leader myself and the colleagues I talk to, is just the uncertainty, just uncertainty around planning, right? Whether that's because of your particular market, where some markets are hit very hard, whether it's because, in our case with technology, it's actually, or at least, my end of the market, it's fortunately, it's been a place where there's been a lot more investment, right, in digital transformation and so on. But the uncertainty is whether you're in a better or worse area of the economy, the uncertainty is so high in terms of what will happen next, be it growth and spending or decline and so on. So I think one thing that we've had to do, for example, is at Tasktop is actually just shorten our planning cycles to, I don't know, what they were about 10 years ago, because the rate of change is faster, and it's been great. It's helped us adapt much more quickly, and we've been very successful with it. So basically, the ability to reallocate resources and people and talent and investment to where you're seeing the most results, and then take that feedback. So creating that feedback loop right now between you and the market is critical. And of course, these are all things we've been talking about for a decade. It's just that now these waterfall planning cycles are longer than major shifts in the economy, right? Be they vaccine driven, be they second wave driven, whatever it may be there things changing to different sectors. So you can no longer afford at a business level a waterfall planning cycle, which means you need to be able to understand and measure your product portfolio, its performance, and be able to adjust, at minimum at a quarterly basis. So I think this is why having that product operating model in place is key to navigating this level of uncertainty, and then having this feedback loop between the market, delivery, and planning is just super critical. And the companies that have that in place will have much better chances than those who don't. And of course, then you have to assume that there are companies in your space that do have that in place, because I think we've now seen that this kind of product-oriented model, tracking flow and business results, is a solved problem. So I think to me, what's important is that companies take this seriously. They don't. The old ways are no longer acceptable, and that we help them collectively as much as we can move as quickly as we can to being these digital product innovators.
It's an exciting time, and I think what I'm seeing from the people that I interact with, as we all recognize, COVID's accelerated things, right? So by 12 to 24, maybe 36 months, right? What we thought was going to take that long is right here now, right? Status quo being pretty safe, 7-8 months ago. It's to your point, it's not anymore. And so it does seem like, this is really something everybody should be on top of their top of mind of, like, how we were building software even 8 to 12 months ago isn't going to survive, or we're not going to survive because of the way that we're the engagement necessary with your customers on a digital platform. If you don't have that feedback loop of less than a quarter, less than 6 months, which is still, there's many companies out there that's their cadence of, like, we are putting out new value each 6 months. And it's, to your point, the tectonic shifts of customer expectation they don't last that long, right? So you're already 2 evolutions behind by that point. So I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. Always enjoy getting your perspective. You bring a lot of energy. It's always really brilliant to hear you speak. I love your perspective, and I love what you guys are doing. So for those of you interested in learning more, Mik's book, Project to Product, is available on Amazon. It's been in the top 10 business books there since it was published.
It's still, yeah, the pandemic's actually had it in the top 5 and top 1 sometimes. It's yeah, the book got more popular during the pandemic, which has been interesting. It's, of course, the last thing we want is a pandemic, but I think it's been helpful to me to see that people are accepting, as you said, Patrick, status quo is not good enough, and that they owe it to their companies, their customers, and their staff to drive change much more quickly than they have before.
Yeah, and I think for the innovators out there, the entrepreneurs, really status quo is in jeopardy. This is ripe opportunity for people who want to go make change, right? When top dollar numbers were off the charts, it's hard to make a case. Now it's easy to make a case of what we were doing is not going to survive. So this is a great time to step into that void and push your organization if that's the way you want your career to go and that's who you want to be. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Mik, coming on and talking to us today.
Yeah, thanks, Mik.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Patrick.
We also want to thank you, our listeners. We really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us and listen to what Mik has to say.
And if you'd like to receive new episodes as they're published, you can subscribe by visiting our website at dragonspears.com/podcast or find us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode was sponsored by Dragon Spears and produced by Dante32.